Let's talk about some of the major highlights from Down to Earth this month. Now, the first thing that we would discuss focuses on the Rio Earth Summit. Rio Earth Summit was held in Brazil in the year 1992. The idea was to understand a balance between economic and environmental development. The whole framework was set to understand the long-term implications and how developed and developing nations, the nations of North and South as we call them, can come together without stripping off the resources and the environment. So a kind of sustainable development which could be planned, and this was under the UN conference on environmental development. The next is farmers are now taking on multinationals. Now what the idea was, there has been an attack on the Kargil seeds office in Bangalore, which showed a significant awareness about how the gene thefts have been done by multinational corporations, mainly in the third world nations. Now, what have been the ideas behind it? The first is they are trying to erode the biodiversity. They are trying to enslave the farmers regarding their terms and conditions for contract farming. So farmers are enslaved. The next is the farmers are more dependent now on MNCs for the seeds, and therefore we say there is a gene theft. So genetic theft taking place, and this is where we have been addressing the issues. Now there has been a recent controversy between PepsiCo and the Gujarat farmers. Now PepsiCo filed a lawsuit against the farmers for infringement of the kind of variety of potatoes which was patented by the PepsiCo. Now this was grown exclusively for manufacturing potato chips under the brand of PepsiCo. But later the lawsuit was withdrawn, and there were significant rules that explained about the plant protection variety and the Farmers' Rights Act, and therefore it was conferred that the conservation of the species holds with the firm as well as the farmers. So both of them have the equal right for the same. So this PepsiCo and Gujarat government issue has been very controversial, very important. The next is, with the pandemic we have seen resurgence of diseases. Whenever there is resurgence, there is emergence again and again of diseases, as we talk about Spanish flu in 1920s, and back in 2020s we have COVID-19. Now these resurgence of diseases are usually attributed to certain parameters. We broadly classify these parameters as either ecobiological, or they can be human factors, or there could be some kind of drug resistance that can happen. For example, with the use of antibiotics in the bovine animals, what has happened is the antibiotic resistance which was there in the poultry, in the cows, has been transmitted to human beings, and therefore we now talk about tuberculosis, which is more antibiotic resistant. So drug resistance starts to evolve. Now similarly, when high viral doses, antiviral doses are being administered to patients with COVID-19, there could be significant development of this antiviral resistance in lower order organisms. So this waste products going from human beings to the pipelines would go into smaller order organisms, and they would start to develop the antiviral resistance in their body. So drug resistance is one of the major reasons why we say there is resurgence of disease again and again. Good example so far we can cite is tuberculosis, as I said, malaria, kala azar, and then we might see the impacts of COVID-19 probably 10 years, 40 years down the lane. The next is human factors. When we say human factors, infrastructure inadequacy. As in India, we are now witnessing shortage of oxygen. There can be administrative loopholes which can be responsible for it, negligence in policy, improper sanitation and drainage network, and lack of human power or lack of trained or skilled human power, as we can face shortage of doctors, nurses and paramedical staff. The next is ecobiological factors. Now ecobiological factors would include all of those. So definitely drug resistance, a paramount condition that we focus when we talk about disease resistance. Similarly, we have insecticide resistance when we focus on plant species which are growing. There can be newer strains which can evolve. So similar to this, when we focus on vaccination, we talk about newer strains or the changes in the spike protein which could lead to new strains being developed which are not prevented or which cannot be prevented by the process of vaccination or the existing vaccines that are there. There can be also human engineered challenges. Now human engineered challenges can be in the form of, let's say, we have a couple of migrant workers working in the city of Bangalore. Now with the COVID lockdown, these migrants had to rush back to their own native places. Now they would carry the strain from Karnataka to their native places, let's say in UP or Bihar. Similarly, a migrant coming from Kerala would carry a different strain to their community in UP and Bihar, and there where you have two different strains which were previously more dangerous, when they mutate again, there could be a new strain that could be evolved, and therefore we say human engineered changes can be witnessed. So these are some of the major factors which lead to disease resistance. The next is a very interesting concept about Virappan. We all know Virappan and his ideas about the sandalwood. Now what have been the issues with sandalwood? In Indian government has made an exclusive law on sandalwood. Now what is the law on sandalwood? On the law on sandalwood, it says that wherever the sandalwood plant is, that would lie for with the government. Even if it is on a personal property, it can be only sold to government. No private organization can take charge of it. There is no rules whatsoever for any private organization to handle sandalwood. So if it is on the government land in the forest, it would be going directly to the forest. If it is on a personal land, if you have your garden with a sandalwood, definitely you would have to sell it to the government itself. Now these kind of policies make certain things inaccessible to people, and also smuggling starts, and Virappan's example is a classic example to explain it. Now what actually happened in the story of Virappan? In the story of Virappan, we can understand that Virappan and its colleagues had very intimate knowledge about the local areas where sandalwood grows. Even the CRPF team or the government officials do not know the exact places where sandalwood is. So they have a better knowledge of the terrain, better knowledge of the local area, and sometimes terror amongst local would be one of the factors through which they can come into power. So there are two options where these kind of things or activities can be controlled. First is to open up sandalwood for everyone, to encourage farmers to grow sandalwood, and this would make it accessible to everyone. Once it is accessible to everyone, there is no requirement for any kind of smuggling. So the bandits like Virappan would automatically be marginalized. The second important step is there can be a situation where there is no control and anyone can exploit it. So in that case, government should have certain depots where a person can sell the produce, or they can bring in much more systematized process for procurement of sandalwood. So those are the two things that could be done to ensure that there is no illegal use of sandalwood. The next is, whenever plants grow, we understand there is pollination. In lower classes, we have understood what is self-pollination with what is cross-pollination. So self-pollination occurs within the plant itself. It can be within the same flower or within a different flower of the same plant. However, cross-pollination occurs across plant. Now what can be the pollinators? Pollinators can be vertebrates, invertebrates. So when I say invertebrates, honeybee is a classic example. We all are very familiar with it. The next is vertebrates. Among vertebrates, we have bats, fruit bats as a good example. Then human beings, sometimes rats, small order animals, squirrels as an example, which can bring the pollens from one tree to another. Now why these pollinators who act as pollinator are important? They are important to maintain biodiversity, to boost productivity, to increase production in the surrounding area, and definitely help the species propagate. If the pollinators are not there, the species propagation would stop. Now, by if any means we are trying to modify the environment, we are trying to reduce one of the pollinators, let's say. For example, there were latest news about bats spreading diseases like Nipah virus, and if the population of bats is controlled, what would happen? The bats, which act as pollinator for many of the trees, would not be there, and therefore those trees or those vegetation would also decline. So pollination management is an important concept that must be taken into account. The quality and the quantity of harvest, how future propagation can take place, and if there is no propagation, there can be scenarios where even famine or drought conditions can occur. So proper pollination management is important. Beekeeping and apiculture, as we call, is an important industry which promotes pollination. Not only it brings revenue to the farmers by farmers selling the honey under the sweet revolution, but it also helps trees grow, species propagate, because bees are one of the best pollinators, we say. So in 1970s, National Commission on Agriculture recommended that Indian agricultural universities should set up certain sections for research, education and training specifically on these pollinators. We have numerous scientists who have been working for the same. Also, if we talk about other developed nations like China or Argentina, Mexico, these are some of the nations where bee colonies are considered a great source of revenue, not even just for honey but for wax and other byproducts as well. However, these kinds of steps needs to be enhanced in countries like India. The next is the issue about floods and droughts. Now we have been knowing it very well, specifically when there is issues of flood. First is the urban flood. Urban flood is a huge management problem when it comes to the concrete area or the paved area. So there is no way for water to seep, and therefore water starts to accumulate. So there should be proper drainage lines that could make sure that extra water seeps away. The next important is embankments. Embankments, if not properly constructed along the river, along the canals, what would happen? This would lead to overflow. Overflow would lead to ultimate devastation of the nearby surrounding areas. So if the drainage congestion is there, if there is improper embankments, there are broken embankments, no repair work done for the same, all those can affect the flood conditions. So protecting flood, bringing in flood guidelines, flood control policies are important. Similarly, with the droughts, what we say is rainwater harvesting is very important. It is believed that India on an average has a village size of 1200 people, and what is important is if the India's average requirement for water conservation, if we say, is 1100 millimeters. So 1100 millimeters is the average water requirement for an Indian family size. Now, or the average requirement for the rainfall. Now, with this statistics in mind, that the average village size is 1200 and the average rainfall requirement is 1100 millimeters, we can understand that in a village only an area of 1.2 hectares is required to build up sustainable amount of water capacity for a year-round basis, and this could generate nearly 6.5 million liters of water for a yearly basis. Even if there is drought and half of the water, this could go down to 3 million liters. Still, this 3 million liters would be a huge amount. So, what the major issue right now is not the inadequate rainfall but the inefficient management of water resources. If the water resources are efficiently maintained and managed, the water wells are properly created, rainwater is properly harvested, and if any repair work is required, that is properly done, there is no seepage, no leakage, then definitely we do have ample of water that can be used. So water schemes can be developed, and more importantly, we need to make people aware that they should not worry about the water bills or their water pays, because this is something which would reduce the later health burden on their families, the issues related to waterborne disease. And therefore, paying the water meters or paying the water bills should not be a concern, and this should be taken into an immediate awareness background in the minds of the common people, mainly in the rural area. The next is coarse grains. Now, India is a land where we have been cultivating rice, wheat under the Green Revolution. Coarse grains are the grains which definitely have a higher nutritious value, and according to M.S. Swaminathan, who himself is the father of Green Revolution in India, he believed that we should not call these grains as coarse grains but call them as nutritional grains, because they have a significantly higher nutrition value as compared to other grains. Good examples are barley, jowar, ragi, bajra. All of those are coarse grains, or what we say thicker grains. Now these grains, why they haven't been grown at a vast scale as rice and wheat in India? First of the reason is there is slow productivity growth in these cases. The next important reason is the low price in the market. Because the farmers do not get adequate price for these coarse grains, they are not interested to grow it. Sometimes there is crop substitution that occurs. Also, if there is a famine or a drought and there is crop insurance, those crop insurance are mainly given for the standardized wheat and rice crops. There is no insurance which is claimed for coarse grains in many cases, and therefore no crop loans, no crop insurances lead to lower production for these coarse grains. Also, government does not come to rescue the farmers in case the farmers are not able to do well and earn well with the coarse grains. So those are some of the reasons why farmers do not go for coarse grains. But if they go for coarse grains, definitely, as we mentioned, it has high nutritional value. Even the arid, semi-arid areas, there can be more vegetation by coarse grain because they require lesser water content and can grow well even on semi-arid and dry soils. The micronutritional deficiencies with these coarse grains is lesser because they require lesser kind of nutrients and fertilizers for their growth, and the real food security issue in India can be easily addressed with the problems and the issues which have been with the coarse grains. Now what is very, very important is we have been seeing over the years that despite of all the development, our poultry has been witnessing severe shortage of fodder. Now fodder, which is the bread and butter for those involved in animal husbandry, have witnessed the shortage. Why? First of all, there has been negligence, there has been shrinking of the common area, no good crop growth which has been seen. Sometimes the normal lands are converted either into a barren land or a wasteland, and therefore this reduces the amount of fodder which is generated, and the poultries do not get enough fodder. Similarly, we have seen that the traditional area which was under rice and wheat has been significantly reduced. This has led to more crops like barley and coarse grains which do have reduced fodder development. The only fodder crop which has survived well, we can say, is maize. Maize, we can say, if it grows, 60% of the maize can be used for feed industry or the fodder industry, and therefore maize is the only crop which can see a success among these. The next is a very commonly heard topic these days, and that is obesity. Now there are two important factors that relate to obesity. One is fat, the other is sugar. Both of these are responsible for being obese. If you have been obese in your lifetime, you are increasing your chances for non-communicable diseases like diabetes, hypertension, asthma. You can have arthritis, any kind of cardiovascular disorders. So all these are highly related to or have high coincidence with obesity. Now fat and sugar, as we said, are important among these. WHO has given the guidelines. WHO says that 10% of your diet on the daily basis should be sugar, not more than that. And WHO also says that 15 to 30% of your diet should be fat, not more than that. However, US has brought its own norms. According to US, it says 8% of the diet should be sugar, that should be fine, less than what WHO says. But when it comes to fat, US says 20 to 35% fat is okay. Now why? Because on one hand, they are trying to say that you need to lead a healthy lifestyle, but on the other hand, there are the big producers and extensive marketing which is done by the companies selling junk food, and they need to survive their economies. So there has been a kind of controversy when it comes to the real execution, but yes, definitely reduced consumption of fat and sugar is one of the primary aspects that need to be discussed. Also, there have been various incidences where we have seen that there have been ideas to prevent obesity. Now, changing the lifestyle, definitely with more fruits, more vegetables, more consumer education, more surveillance by the government, sometimes changing the fiscal and monetary requirements. For example, city in US, Boston, has a higher tax on the processed food. The idea is people would automatically buy the unprocessed food or the raw vegetables and the fruits, and as a result there would be more healthy lifestyle that can be seen. The next is farmers. Now farmers have been going into debt over the years, and therefore cases of farmer suicide have been increasing. The reason primarily being there are higher input costs that they have to bear. Also, the produce that they are getting is less. Sometimes there is low productivity, sometimes there is water scarcity, sometimes there is flooding that occurs, and all of those affect the farmers' production. Also, MSP is not properly given to the farmers. Now, in all these cases, farmer who is already under the loan has no other option but to end his life, and therefore we have seen the rising cases of suicide among farmers with a special focus on cotton cultivation in the recent days, where the price of the raw cotton is only 40 to 50% of what a price is obtained in an international market by other countries. So in contrast to US cotton farmers, what Indian cotton farmers get is 40 to 45% lower, because the government there is putting in more higher subsidies, and therefore they are able to sell their cotton at a much lower price in the international market. So if we want to sustain our agriculture, we need to focus and adopt indigenous patterns, indigenous growth, create technologies where we can reduce the cost and bring in unique varieties, bring in the concept of Gandhi's charka, not just as a mere symbol but as an execution. The next is the islands. Now we have seen over the time period Sundarbans and the nearby areas where a lot of mangrove vegetation grows. We have seen that the islands have been either vanishing, or with the rising water table, there have been subsiding lands. Vanuatu, a case study we already discussed, and there have been similarly other many Micronesian islands which have been affected because of climate change, because of seawater rising, and with further melting of glaciers in the regions of Antarctica, Arctic, melting ice. We have seen that these islands which are vanishing would slowly and gradually increase. So even the natural environment for, let's say, species of tiger in Sundarbans, or the muggers which are native to the Sundarbans, the crocodiles as they are called as, are also at threat, and many of the species could lose their life. The next is the kinds of vehicles. In the last edition we have already talked about the electric and the hybrid vehicles, but at the same time we focus there have been various reasons why these have not been popular among the country. Now first of all is a higher cost that a person has to bear to buy those, the higher weight, more complexity, difficulty in charging stations, and the economy of scale, we could probably say. So economy of scale is not good. Now all these are the factors which affect the vehicles and the vehicle industry. We have seen that on an average there have been countries like Japan where on an average the life of the vehicle is 2 to 3 years, and after 3 years you have to go for another registration for 2 years. And in the developed nations, on an average a person uses a vehicle for 7 to 8 years and sells it into a developing nation. Now in the developing nation, the average lifespan of the vehicle is 12 to 18 years probably for the vehicle. Now what happens is, from the developed nations where the vehicle remains for 7 to 8 years until the time it's in a pristine condition, it's fine. Then it moves to the developing nation. As it moves to the developing nation, it is based on older technology, so there is more fuel consumption, there is higher carbon footprints or carbon emissions that are released. So definitely, who is at the harm? Developing nations come at the harm. And therefore, we have seen how there have been stringent rules and guidelines in the developed nations where the time duration for which you can use a vehicle is very, very small, specifically in Japan where it's only 3 years, and you need to renew your vehicle every 2 years after it. The next is internet freedom. In 2011 in Egypt, we have seen the President Hosni Mubarak basically shutting down the whole of internet in Egypt in the extreme cases where there were mass protests going on, and this was known as a kill switch. In India, we witnessed that in 2008 when there were attacks in Mumbai terror condition, there was a law that was brought down, and this was an amendment to the Information Technology Act 2000 under 69A section, which said that center has a right to issue directions to block the public access of any of the computer resource. That means any of the website or web application government has the right to block. And there have been issues of internet freedom, but on a very restricted scale. Therefore, if we say there are huge large base internet shutdowns that could definitely affect and influence the country and the nation as a whole. The next is the Arctic rush. This is a very interesting concept. Now, Antarctica is a region where there has been a treaty which has been signed, which says that each of the nations have certain sectors of Antarctica that are under their control. However, there is no common such policy for the Arctic. What is happening in recent days is, with the melting of the glaciers, the ice in the Arctic area is melting. So the nations close to the Arctic regions have a close eye on it. What are the nations? Definitely Russia with 1/3 of the Arctic region. We have Sweden, the Scandinavian nations. Then we have Sweden, we have Norway, Iceland, Denmark, US. All of those have been the main observers of the Arctic region. Arctic is known to have more than 400 oil fields, and it is believed that there is 240 billion barrels of crude oil. 240 billion barrels of crude oil that is present within the Arctic region, and this amount could further increase with further melting of the ice. So all the nations which are close to the Arctic, since as I said, Arctic do not have any standardized Arctic treaty similar to the Antarctic treaty, there are nations who have been trying to become superpower by gaining control over the mineral resources hidden in the ice below. Now, this Arctic region, as we said, there are some primary nations and there are also the observer nations. The non-Arctic nations which are part of the Arctic Council as the observer members mainly are the Spain, France, Germany, UK, Netherlands, India, South Korea, Italy, and so on. Now, these nations do not have the right to the Arctic but are part of the observer committee where they are part of the decision making. Now let's talk about some of the other developments. So first is the Uttarakhand floods. We have seen the recent Uttarakhand floods, and we also saw the floods back in 2013. We have covered those in a separate lecture, but the idea is the eco-sensitive zones that are present in India needs to be conserved at a very high rate. So setting up of electropower projects in these areas can basically imbalance the existing geology of the region. Also, mining, quarrying in these regions can bring in devastation. The next is rejuvenation of Ganga. Now, Ganga rejuvenation under the Namami Ganga project has been important. There are various ways under which Ganga has been trying to be revived. First of it is we are trying to dilute the waste. So waste dilution is the first effort. The next is we are trying to bring in sewage networks where the sewage would go into a systematic flow and would not go directly into the Ganga river. The third is if there is waste which is untreated, then it should not be disposed directly into the river. So there should be proper treatment plants that can be established. The next is we are trying to ask cities about alternatives. Where is the sewage and the treatment waste can go, rather than putting it directly into the Ganga river. And finally is what can be the kind of cleaning programs, awareness programs that as a citizens can be released and executed. The next is talking about the vaccines. We have been seeing a lot of debates and controversies around vaccines. How much vaccine can be produced, how much population can be given vaccine, and how much duration would it be given, how efficient it is. Sometimes based on religion and culture there are controversies, because some people consider it as anti-religious or anti-cultural. Definitely immunization over the years, through our experience, we have seen has improved the way of life. We have seen the immunizations with DPT, we have seen the immunizations with polio, diphtheria, and so on, and all this have definitely improved the human life. We need to acknowledge how different views and values can be absorbed, but at the same time we should be very well aware that how efficient the vaccines have been, and what are the changes or modifications or booster doses if required that should be given, and how better they can be given to the public. The next is we have seen how the things have been changing in terms of water resource and waste resource. Karnataka has been a leading example. Mahatma Gandhi once said that sanitization is more important than independence. That means proper sanitization and hygiene is very important for well-being of an individual. So sanitation practices, if are good, would lead to lesser diseases and lesser medical expenses on part of a nation and an individual. So Karnataka government started with sustainable development goals 6 and 12. 6 focuses on equal access to water and sanitation for all. 12 focuses on a sustainable consumption and production patterns. Both of those have been incorporated by Karnataka government under the Karnataka Rural Sanitation Strategy program, where guidance for restructuring, rebuilding, financial support has been granted at the grassroots level, at the community level, local level, and there has been increased capacity building. Also we are focusing on ODF plus India, where we say open defecation free plus. We are moving now from open defecation to open defecation plus, and here we say that we need to bring in a behavioral change. It's not just the construction of the infrastructure, but also a behavioral change that is required. A call center in the name of Parihar has been started with Karnataka government, and here a person can register the queries at any time. Now WHO has been focusing again about how the sanitation issues could have been one of the reasons for the ongoing pandemic, and if proper sanitation facilities are not given to the people, there could be higher incidences of spread of pandemic. So in order to bring in better health security for everyone, we need to have a better health structure and a stronger network for the basic facilities which are there. Under the Global Health Security Index, which we call as GHS Index, WHO has indicated, this is one of the researches laid down by John Hopkins University, and it says that national health securities are fundamentally weak across the globe. At a scale where we say 100 is one of the best indicators, most of the countries are ranking only around 40%. That means there need to be a highway around in terms of global health security. Now this global health security focuses on good planning, management, coordination, infrastructure, better healthcare response facilities, better medical team, and better skilled professionals which are required, and moreover a community awareness that can be built. So farmers protest recently have been rising, and we have seen that with the pandemic and the ongoing issues, these protests have sometimes been subsided, but now there have been a rising controversy between the farmers itself, and this is the rich and the poor, rich versus the poor farmers. Now we have seen that these issues have definitely weakened our roots, and this need not to happen in future. So curtailment of this at a very early stage is required. The next is the State of Environment report has been released recently by CSC in 2021, and according to it, Tarapur in Maharashtra has emerged as the most polluted cluster. Among the best performing states, we have Kerala, Himachal Pradesh, and Andhra Pradesh, Tamil Nadu, and Telangana. The worst performing are the states of Bihar, Jharkhand, and Arunachal Pradesh, Meghalaya, and Uttar Pradesh in terms of environmental parameters. And under this pandemic generation, we have seen the levels of pollutions have been worsening, and even the clusters where industries are being established. For example, Himachal Pradesh is known for its pharma industry production, or the pharmaceutical center at Gaddi, but despite of that, it is one of the best performing state in terms of reduced pollution and the reduced impact on the environment. The next is sea buckthorn. Now, sea buckthorn is seen or grows in the areas of Ladakh, and this plantation is unique because it has a strong soil binding capacity. The cold deserts have witnessed the sea buckthorn plantation, and this is also used as a folk medicine in many cases. In many cases, it has been used to treat ailments related to stomach, heart, or skin problems, and the troops usually consume this because it is very high in omega fatty acids and also has rich concentration of vitamins and carotenoids. The next is Asola Bhatti Wildlife Sanctuary. Now, Asola Bhatti Wildlife Sanctuary is in Delhi, and there have been a recent issue where this region, which lies in the extension of Aravalli Mountains, have been affected by dumping of the waste, and there has been a decision not to dump the waste in the nearby areas of the mines that surround it. So this significantly affects the migratory birds coming to the area, and it's also one of the major sources for the water recharge. So definitely it needs to be controlled by all means. The next is companies that have been selling refrigerators, washers, hair dryers, or televisions in European Union have been asked to replace or ensure that these appliances which are sold in European Union would be repaired in 10 years. For up to 10 years they would have the right to repair. So right to repair has come up in European Union for 10 years, and this is one of the major developments. We have seen that some of the countries of the developed world are the highest producer of e-waste generation. In order to curb this e-waste, what the idea is now, do not just dispose the item if it is not functional, at least give it a try for repair. So there have been ideas for bringing in repair rather than a use and throw economy model that has been commonly seen. The next is black-browed babbler. Now, black-browed babbler is one of the species which was discovered recently in Indonesia. It has went missing for nearly last 170 years. It is called as the biggest angema of Indonesia's ornithology because it is one of the very unique birds which has been found in the Kalimantan area of Indonesia and has been listed under data deficient because there was no data about it for last 170 years, but recently has been rediscovered. The next is India's INDC goals which need to be achieved by 2030. So we have seen that we would be reducing the emission intensity of the GDP by around 1/3. The total of 40% of the electricity would now come from non-fossil fuel sources. So we are focusing on growing renewable sources of energy, and also we are trying to bring down our carbon emissions by bringing in additional carbon sinks which would be developed through more forest cover and tree cover in the upcoming years. Now, here we have the list of some of the national parks from Odisha and the wildlife sanctuaries from Odisha. Why are they famous and why are they known? We have cited those down. For example, Chilika, the Nalaban Island, is known as one of the world's second largest lagoon, and it is known for the home to Irrawaddy dolphins. Similarly, we have Hadgad, where we see Magar crocodiles. The variety of crocodiles which is in the name of Magar is commonly seen in these areas. So those are some of the national parks that we have commonly seen, and Simlipal is another important reserve which was initially a tiger reserve in Odisha. Later, it was also a part of the Biosphere Reserve in 94, and we have seen that it's now part of the UNESCO Biosphere Reserve program. So those are some of the important national parks and wildlife sanctuaries in Odisha, how they have been conserved and what are the species that have been protected in those areas. So that was something that we have discussed for this Down to Earth edition. We would be covering Down to Earth every fortnightly. Every 15 days we come up with the edition of summary on Down to Earth. So stay tuned for updates from our side. Have a wonderful day ahead. Study well, prepare well, stay safe.